Start with introducing myself. My name is Muhamed, and I founded Amnesty International on campus here 4 years ago. And our mission was always to bring the world within reach, just like our school logo. And I want to thank all the co-sponsors for this event. Otherwise, this would not have been possible. The International Office of Education, Student Revolutionary Coalition, and I definitely want to thank UA Peace Action for promoting the events, as well as the Multicultural Rainbow Group and our awesome photographer, Ying Savan. All right. Well, tonight we're going to be having a special guest, a legend, Bosnian former minister, and former ambassador of Bosnia, the first one who made the country possible, Muhamed Sacirbey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really gratified by the turnout, and I hope I'll have a chance to engage with some of you. I won't bother to mention all the institutions and organizations that supported this. I tend to avoid formality, but I appreciate the effort and certainly appreciate your commitment for being here. Let me just first of all make this point. This is about Bosnia. This is about places like Bosnia. This is about the rule of law. This is about what's going on in Syria today. But most importantly, it's about you. The world is a very unexpected place in terms of what happens to us, but also how we can fashion what happens to the world and what happens to our friends, our family, and our society. So when we speak of a situation, it's not so distant anymore, especially with social media, especially with our ability to engage. It's really right next door. It's right next to your finger. If you use Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, and you can make a difference. In fact, last semester I started teaching a course on digital diplomacy and the new media, which is about being a journalist and a reporter on the one hand, but also on the other hand being an activist, whether that's a part-time job or a full-time job. So before I forget, I was speaking to a couple of your professors here and university administrators, and I'll make sure that those of you who are really interested in international affairs, may be interested in having a career or just being involved, I'll make available a field trip at the United Nations in a way that maybe some of you haven't seen it in the past. All you have to worry about is getting down there, and I have the passes and I'll get you through. It may inspire, it may inform, but in the end, it may make you feel like you have the ability to do just a little bit. And the way I talk about having the ability to do something, it's a ripple. And when that ripple goes way beyond you, it may be almost indiscernible. But in the end, it may be that ripple that changes the current. I've been most fortunate in my life that I've had the chance to maybe not change the current, but at least feel like I made a difference, sometimes even swimming upstream. After what happened in Boston and the Boston Marathon, I liken that to a situation where people rationalize very evil acts by presumably good causes or rightful grievances, but in fact, maybe it's also frustration not having the ability to make a change. I must say to you, the ability of any one individual to make a change is sometimes difficult to measure, but actually you do make a change. I've seen it. I've seen it not only in the work that I've done, but actually in the work that people have done through my efforts, that is, those who've influenced me to do something differently. to engage maybe in a different way, to see something differently. So one of the reasons I'm here tonight is because after what happened in Bosnia, and most of you were very young or maybe not even yet born when Bosnia was occurring, I felt that there was an obligation to engage in other situations where human beings were suffering terrible consequences, whether it be through injustice or through poverty or whatever the cause may be. In other words, Bosnia has not stopped for me. Now it's about Syria or Tibet or Democratic Republic of Congo or El Salvador. I'll engage where I think I can make a difference, and part of that is because I can be a catalyst, but also a catalyst in a constructive way. And I must say again, I don't want to overemphasize this point because most of you probably are better in tune with it than I am. Social media in many ways is the tool. But coming out and seeing you, and part of this, flesh to flesh, eye to eye communication is very important. So hopefully some of you will benefit and some of you will feel more inspired, and some of you just may be more educated. And some of you may just say, what the heck was I doing there all night? But that's the way it works sometimes. Let me first of all start out with a little bit of background in Bosnia, because most of you really don't remember. It's the big powers, the big countries that write the history. So the popular history right now is that NATO and the US and the European powers came in to save Bosnia. But it's actually not the case. There was a war that continued for over 3.5 years. A genocide, people starving, cities besieged, people being shelled, before NATO stepped in. There was presumably a UN peacekeeping force, but the UN peacekeeping force was there to keep, they said, to keep a peace once the peace, in fact, was to be agreed upon. Well, the peace wasn't agreed upon, and under the eyes of the UN, most of the killing, most of the genocide did occur. So the idea that somehow the presence of the UN itself is a solution, unfortunately, is a false impression. We see now in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's a very large UN presence, not only do the wars continue, but it's one of those countries where over 1.5 million women have been raped. 1 out of every 4 women in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been raped. So the presence of the UN is no guarantee. Now Syria had initially, well, it's probably not appropriate to say initially, but a year into the conflict, the UN finally decided to send 300 observers. Now that number 300 was somehow magical, and it kind of sounded like the 300 Spartans. But of course, we know that they didn't manage to do anything more than come in, see that it was really bad, and then leave almost as quickly when they themselves were in danger. And in some instances, like in Bosnia, the UN in some ways can almost become an obstacle to a solution, because the UN itself almost becomes a hostage, becomes a third party in the whole process. So very frequently during the Bosnian War, we used to hear things like, well, we can't bomb the Serbian positions that were surrounding Sarajevo or other besieged towns, because the UN troops then would have to face the potential revenge. In the end, actually, that proved to be very much of a false argument, but it worked for a long time for those who probably didn't want to do anything anyway. The real situation in Bosnia was that actually Bosnia wasn't supposed to survive. It was a country that was made up of many different ethnic groups and religious groups, and the assumption was that each one of these groups would kind of go its own way, and it would end up being a very brutal war. And the weakest of the groups, although the biggest in population, the Bosnian Muslims or Bosniaks, would be more or less wiped out, or at least would have to succumb to being ruled by one of the neighboring countries, in particular at that time, Milosevic's Serbia. And lo and behold, when Bill Clinton was running for office, he used to say, we have to do something about helping Bosnia. This was in 1992. When he came to office, he said, well, we have to think about it. And Bill's a friend, a personal friend of mine, but I always remind him, and I remind Strobe Talbot, who was one of his main State Department officials, that they were 3.5 years late, and even then they left a very bad situation that still exists in Bosnia, but I'll get into that later. What happened is actually that Bill sent a couple people, one in particular, to analyze the situation in Bosnia. And the report came back, don't get involved, because betting on the Bosnians is betting on a losing horse. And I think that was actually the language that was being used. Well, lo and behold, because the Bosnians had nowhere else to go, and because they started out from such a huge disadvantage in terms of weapons, in terms of organization, and the former Yugoslav army basically became the Serbian army with all the weapons and all the organization, all the logistics. When they didn't manage to beat us in the beginning, they became obviously frustrated. Part of it was that when you're shooting at, as they say, fish in a barrel, you can be very courageous, but when the fish starts shooting back, that's